Hey there! Hope you are ready for another tension-filled story of a real-life event, a mass shooting that shook the entire world. While you listen to this story, put yourself in Sarah's shoes and relive this terrifying experience with her. Now sit back, relax, and enjoy. It was the evening of the 1st of October 2017. The desert air was cool for a Nevada night, just enough to balance the warmth of bodies packed together at the Route 91 Harvest Festival. The twinkling lights of the Las Vegas Strip shimmered in the distance while the stage bathed the crowd in brilliant colors. Sarah Jacobs laughed with her friends, her eyes shining with excitement. She took in the scene, feeling the pulse of the music vibrate through the ground beneath her boots. It was a perfect night. Country tunes, cold drinks, and a sea of people swaying to the rhythm of it all. "This is the best!" Sarah shouted over the music to Jenna, her best friend since high school. Jenna grinned and raised her beer in a toast. They'd flown in from San Diego that morning, and the whole day had felt like an escape. The work stress, the deadlines, the endless monotony of city life had all faded away in the glow of this night. As the next song began, Sarah closed her eyes and let herself get lost in the sound, the feel of it all. She loved how the festival made her forget everything else. "Are you coming for food?" Jenna tugged at Sarah's sleeve. Sarah hesitated, glancing at the stage as one of her favorite songs started. "Give me 5 minutes!" Sarah yelled. Jenna gave a playful roll of her eyes and waved her off, disappearing into the crowd. Sarah smiled to herself, happy and content, surrounded by strangers yet somehow feeling connected to them all. The energy of the crowd ebbed and flowed like the tide, everyone swaying together, lost in the music. A slight breeze carried the scent of deep-fried food, blending with the sweet smell of beer and the dusty desert air. Sarah soaked in every second of it, thinking how perfect this moment was. But there was something, a strange stillness between the beats of the song that made her open her eyes. She brushed it off, thinking it was just her imagination. Nothing could go wrong on a night like this. But as the final chords of the song rang out, a sound cut through the music, a popping noise. It was distant at first, barely noticeable. Sarah paused, her mind trying to place the sound. Fireworks? The crowd shifted slightly, heads turning toward the sound. Sarah craned her neck, squinting into the distance, but couldn't see anything unusual. A second later, the popping noise returned, more distinct this time. Her heart skipped a beat. That wasn't fireworks. More pops followed in rapid succession. Sarah's breath caught in her throat as she realized what she was hearing. Gunshots. It took a second for the thought to settle, but once it did, it spread like wildfire through the crowd. Panic rippled through the mass of people around her, a wave of disbelief giving way to chaos. People started screaming from all directions. Some ducked instinctively, others bolted in every direction. Sarah stood frozen for a heartbeat, her body refusing to obey her mind's commands. It couldn't be real. Not here, not now. A woman nearby stumbled, her hands flying to her chest as if she'd been hit by something unseen. Blood. The realization hit Sarah like a punch to the stomach. People were falling, not from drunkenness or the music. They were being shot. The music stopped abruptly. The joyful atmosphere shattered in an instant. Sarah's heart raced as she scanned the area for Jenna. Where had she gone? The confusion was overwhelming, and the crowd moved like a tidal wave, pushing and pulling her in every direction. She tried to hold her ground, to look for any sign of her friend, but it was impossible. "Jenna!" Sarah shouted, but her voice was swallowed by the panicked screams of the people around her. The air was enveloped by terror, and the once vibrant lights of the festival now felt like a spotlight on all of them, like targets in an open field. The popping sounds continued, rapid and relentless. Sarah's stomach dropped as she realized the shooter wasn't on the ground. The shots were coming from above. Someone was firing into the crowd from a high vantage point. Her mind struggled to make sense of it all. The single word pounded in her mind, pushing her into action. Sarah turned and ran, not even knowing which direction she was going. She just needed to get out of the open. As she ran, the crowd was a blur around her. Faces distorted by fear, bodies shoving, trampling anything and anyone in their path. Sarah's breath came in short, ragged gasps. At one point, she stumbled over a discarded purse, barely catching herself before crashing into the ground. Her legs were trembling, barely able to keep her upright, but she kept running, frantically trying to escape the terror. The gunfire didn't stop. It was a constant, brutal rhythm in the background, like some nightmarish soundtrack. "Jenna!" Sarah shouted again, her voice cracking, but she knew it was useless. Jenna was gone, swallowed by the chaos. Sarah didn't know if she'd ever see her again. Her heart ached with the uncertainty of it. There wasn't time to think, though. Not now. Ahead, she saw a cluster of people huddled behind a metal barricade, their bodies pressed against each other in desperation. Without thinking, Sarah threw herself down next to them, her hands shaking as she tried to catch her breath. She glanced around wildly, trying to take stock of her situation. Blood stained the pavement around them, the sounds of crying and screaming filling the air. "What's happening?" a woman next to her sobbed, clutching her arm. Sarah didn't know how to answer. All she knew was that they needed to move. Staying still felt like a death sentence. She peeked over the barricade, her heart thudding in her chest. People were still running, some darting for exits, others just collapsing in the middle of the street. She saw no sign of where the shots were coming from, but they weren't stopping. They were trapped, pinned down by a faceless attacker. Sarah squeezed her eyes shut, willing herself to calm down, to think. They couldn't stay here. She had to move. But where could she go? Every direction seemed just as dangerous as the last. The gunfire rang out again, seemingly getting louder all the time. She had to decide. Now. The shots came in rapid bursts, relentless and unforgiving. Sarah lay flat on her stomach, every nerve in her body on high alert. The cold metal of the barricade pressed against her side, offering little comfort as the chaos continued around her. The people huddled with her were crying softly, their faces pale with terror. She pressed her hands over her ears, trying to drown out the noise, but it was everywhere. Gunfire, screams, the desperate cries for help. It all blended into one deafening roar. Her body trembled, but she forced herself to stay still, stay hidden. She couldn't be seen. She couldn't be next. Time slowed, every second dragging on for an eternity. Sarah could feel the heat of her own breath as she lay there, her mind racing. Her thoughts were a jumble. Memories of her family, her job, her life before this moment. It all seemed so distant now, like it belonged to someone else. Then the gunfire paused for a brief second, a small reprieve in the storm. Sarah lifted her head slightly, scanning the area. Bodies littered the ground, and the air was thick with the nauseating smell of dust and blood. It was like a war zone, something out of a nightmare. Sarah's heart ached for the people around her. She had no idea how many were dead, how many had been injured, but the sheer scale of it was overwhelming. She could hear faint whispers of prayers, the ghastly gasps of those still clinging to life. She wanted to help, but she couldn't move. She was paralyzed by fear, by the weight of the moment. Then she heard it, a faint whimper coming from somewhere nearby. She turned her head slowly, and there, a few feet away, she saw a man lying on his back, clutching his stomach. His face was contorted in pain, blood seeping through his fingers. Sarah's heart skipped a beat. He was alive, but it seemed only barely. She knew she couldn't stay hidden forever. If she didn't move soon, she might not survive. But if she left him there, if she didn't at least try to help, she'd never forgive herself. The gunfire started again, but she didn't hesitate. She couldn't. So, with a surge of adrenaline, she crawled toward the man as fast as she could, keeping low to the ground. Every inch felt like a mile, her body screaming in protest. She reached him just as his eyes fluttered open, glazed with pain. "I'm here," she whispered, her voice shaky. "I'm going to help you." Sarah pressed her hands against the man's wound, trying to stop the bleeding, though she had no idea what she was doing. The warmth of his blood seeped through her fingers, and her stomach churned, but she couldn't think about that now. She had to focus. I can't," he gasped, his breath ragged. His face was pale, his lips trembling as he fought to stay conscious. Sarah could see the fear in his eyes, the desperation. "You're going to be okay," she said, though she wasn't sure if she even believed that herself. She wasn't even sure if she was going to be okay. The gunfire continued in the distance, but now, for the first time, Sarah could hear something else. Sirens. Help was coming. She glanced up, scanning the area, and saw flashing lights in the distance. Police cars. Ambulances. Hope flickered in her chest. They might have a chance. But they were still in danger. The shooter wasn't done yet, she was convinced of that. Every second they stayed there, exposed, was a second closer to getting shot. She needed to get them both out of there, but the man didn't seem to be in any condition to move. For a moment, Sarah was uncertain what to do. Will she be able to drag him to his feet? Will he be able to run, or will she have to carry him? And will she even be able to do that? Suddenly, a group of people rushed past her, heading for an exit. Sarah's heart pounded in her chest. She had to make a choice. Leave him and run for safety, or stay and risk both of their lives. Her mind raced. She could see the exit now, just a few hundred feet away. If she ran, she might make it. But if she left him here, there is a very strong possibility that he wouldn't survive. She couldn't live with that. "Come on," she whispered, her voice trembling as she slid her arms under his. "We have to go." With every ounce of strength she had left, Sarah heaved the man to his feet. He groaned in pain, his body sagging heavily against hers. She could feel his blood soaking through her shirt, but she gritted her teeth and kept moving. They had no choice. They had to keep going. The exit felt impossibly far away. Every step was a struggle, each one slower than the last. The man stumbled, nearly dragging them both to the ground, but Sarah tightened her grip on him, refusing to let go. Gunfire rang out again, and she could hear the rounds hitting solid objects near them. Sarah's heart pounded in her chest, her breath coming in sharp gasps. She didn't know if they'd make it, but she couldn't stop. She couldn't give up now. Just a little farther, she whispered, though her own legs were shaking. Her muscles screamed in protest, her lungs burning as she pushed forward. Every step felt like a victory, but the danger was still way too close. People ran past them, some glancing over their shoulders, others too panicked to notice anything but their own survival. Sarah understood. Everyone was just trying to stay alive. But she couldn't leave this man behind, not when they were so close to safety. They reached the edge of the festival grounds, the flashing lights of emergency vehicles finally within reach. Sarah's body felt like it was about to give out, but she pushed through the pain, her focus narrowing on one goal: survive. Just as they neared the gate, another round of gunfire erupted. Sarah's heart lurched as a sharp pain exploded in her side. She gasped, her vision blurring, but she didn't stop. She couldn't stop. The man groaned in her arms, but she didn't have time to check if he'd been hit. Almost there, she gasped, her voice barely audible. Blood trickled down her side, the warmth seeping into her clothes, but she didn't let herself think about it. After the initial jolting pain, she was only able to register numb discomfort in any case. Her body had blocked out the pain almost entirely. She could see the paramedics now, could hear the shouts of police officers directing people to safety. Finally, they crossed the threshold. The man collapsed to the ground as paramedics rushed over to help. Sarah fell to her knees, her whole body trembling with exhaustion. She was safe. They were safe. But even as relief washed over her, the sounds of the festival, of the gunfire, the screams, echoed in her mind. People were still desperately trying to evade the gunmen behind her, and some were still being mowed down. She knew this night would haunt her forever. Sarah sat on the edge of the ambulance, her hands trembling as a paramedic wrapped a bandage around her side. The wound wasn't deep, just a chunk of skin taken out as the bullet passed through, but the pain was starting to set in now that the adrenaline started to wear off. She stared blankly ahead, her mind still in shock, the horrors of the night replaying in her mind. Around her, the scene was chaotic. People crying, others being loaded into ambulances, some sitting in stunned silence like her. The flashing lights of police cars and ambulances bathed the area in an eerie glow. The music, the joy, the laughter of the festival seemed like a distant memory, something that belonged to another world. Jenna. Sarah's heart lurched at the thought of her friend. She hadn't seen her since Jenna left her to go and get food. Was she okay? Had she made it out? Panic surged through her as she suddenly started to scan the crowd, looking for any sign of her friend. But there were too many people, too much chaos. Then, after what seemed like an eternity, a voice broke through her thoughts. "Are you okay?" Sarah looked up to see Jenna standing a ways off to her left, tears streaming down her face. "Oh my God, Jenna," Sarah choked out while hobbling towards her to pull her into a tight embrace. Relief flooded through her, overwhelming and bittersweet. They were alive. They had survived. But as they clung to each other, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that something inside her had changed. She had seen too much, felt too much. The weight of this night would never leave her. Months had passed since that fateful night. But for Sarah, the memories were as vivid as ever. She still heard the gunfire in her dreams, still felt the panic every time she was in a crowd. To Sarah, the world simply didn't feel safe anymore. She had started seeing a therapist, someone who specialized in trauma. The sessions were hard, each one forcing her to confront the fear, the guilt. The survivor's guilt was the worst part. Why had she lived when so many others hadn't? Why had she made it out when others never got the chance? But therapy was helping, little by little. Sarah was learning to forgive herself, to understand that there was no rhyme or reason to what had happened. She was trying to focus on the fact that she had survived, that she still had a life to live. One day she visited a memorial for the victims of the shooting. As she stood before the names etched into the stone, her heart ached for them. She placed her hand on the cold surface, closing her eyes as she whispered a quiet prayer. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, her voice trembling. She knew that healing would be a long road, and some wounds would never fully close. But standing there, surrounded by the memory of those who had been lost, Sarah made a promise to herself. She would live. For them, for the man she had helped, for Jenna, for all the people who never made it out. She would never forget, but she would survive. On that fateful night, 64-year-old Stefan Paddock opened fire on the crowd attending the festival from his 32nd floor suite in the Mandalay Bay Hotel. Stefan emptied more than 1,000 rounds into the crowd, killing 60 people and wounding at least 413 more. The ensuing panic brought the total number of injured to approximately 867. About an hour after Stefan shot the first barrage of rounds into the crowd, police found him dead in his room from a self-inflicted gunshot wound. To this day, the motive for the shooting is officially still undetermined. What are your thoughts on what seems to be an uptake in the occurrences of mass shootings in America? Why do you think people resort to such senseless violence against innocent people? Do you think the government has to take some responsibility for these? Or do you think these people are simply batshit crazy and don't belong out in the open? Please share your views in the comments below. And remember to spray that smelly like button with loads of deodorant and lock him in a room with his buddy, the subscribe button, to marinate for a while. And if you enjoy listening to real-life stories told in story format, remember we upload a brand new story every Wednesday and Sunday. Also, check out the amazing survival story on your screen right now. You will not believe the unbelievable luck this man experienced during relentless spouts of bad luck over the course of his life. Till next time, much love and stay safe.